I'm not sure I'm going to be presenting the complete UNAIDS perspective, but at least my impression of it. It is, as the previous speakers have said, an honor and a pleasure to be here. And I must say, after looking at the list of speakers, realizing this was rather a daunting challenge to be able to contribute and to complement what you will be hearing this evening and what will be occurring over the next 3 days. On behalf of Michelle Sidibe, my boss, who very much wanted to be here, but as Eric said, he's starting the trip to Nigeria, a very critical country, particularly for the global plan, but also for what we're talking about today. I hope that what I'm about to present, and we chose the title of this fairly carefully, will touch on some things that may not come up over the next 3 days. The so-called things that keep you awake at night. We did not want to call this treatment as prevention, whether to do it, but how would you actually do it? What are the things that need to be dealt with? What is some of the new thinking that will help us move forward? I also think it's always good to stop and think how far we have come and how fast this has occurred over the last 30 years. And we've gone from this to this. And this slide, I think, is an interesting one as we see how Jim takes forward his presidency of the World Bank. He brings a perspective that I don't think we've ever seen in a World Bank president. So it's going to be an interesting next 5 years. To this, which just came out 2 weeks ago. And to this, which happened last June at the high-level meeting in New York, the new goals that were set for 2015 that expanded on the Declaration of Commitment, a very bold document, particularly at its time in 2001, signed off, endorsed by all 193 member states. So I want to touch on 5 areas. And Carl's already alluded to it, and Eric also. We aren't going to get anywhere with treatment as prevention until we can scale up testing and focus it better. I want to talk a little bit about delivering of treatment services, but that will not be the main body of this discussion. Availability of drugs. That will make or break treatment as prevention. Funding. Who's going to pay for all this? And what about the other third? And I'll come back to what that means. Scaling up testing. It was interesting to hear about 043. We all recognize the challenges of testing. We recognize that it's a problem in high-income countries, both in the U.S. that has a rather complicated healthcare system, and in the U.K. with the National Health Service. We know that tests need to be affordable, accessible, acceptable. And we need far better linkage with the other parts of the health system if we're really going to test the numbers of people that will need to be tested. We also know that even when we do the tests, many of the test results never get back to the person who needs them or the healthcare provider. And these are for CD4 and EID tests. We've heard, and we all are aware of different types of testing, starting with VCT and moving through this sequence of newer and newer thinking to from VCT to PITC, increased reliance now on mobile testing, home testing and counseling, often in terms of community-based, national testing days and weeks, and something most recently is the combination health screening, which is the big thing going on in South Africa now with the 14 million tests that they've pledged to do, where they also test for malaria, for high blood pressure, and doing it in this broader context and trying to overcome some of the stigma issues. All of these methods are going to need to be considered and probably used. Delivering, the second area, treatment services. Normative guidance, I'm not going to say anything on this. Gottfried will be presenting right after me. I'm also not going to be talking about treatment 2.0, the simplification agenda, but adherence, human resource issues, and dealing with the complications of a whole patient who has other issues in addition to ART and being inherent to it. We all know well everything on this list. The major causes of loss to follow-up, of poor adherence to medication, all of these are going to need to be considered and dealt with. Human resources. We've probably taken task shifting as far as we can go, and we just need more people delivering these services. I'm assuming I can use this glass of no one's. Even if they had, I'd be quite honored to drink the water that they've shared. Yes, indeed. We also have to think through demedicalizing ART. Now, I'm not sure how far we're going to go with this, but it was key to the success of family planning. It was key to the success of malaria. It was key to the success of diarrhea. And then it's decentralization and how the human resource equation will fit with a decentralized approach. We've now got good models on decentralization and task shifting. This one from Malawi. I'm not getting my next one down here. I don't know if you could jump to the next slide. I think it's there. They're coming up here. The next one has to do with home and let's see if we can. Let's see if there's some other button I can push that will move this forward. This is what happens when I'm on the computer, where it goes straight to the shutdown mode. Sorry. Oh, that healthy sound of Microsoft Windows. We'll wait for this to. Oh, I see. We're using an Apple, so maybe that's part of the problem here. See if you can get it down and jump past that. Home-based HIV services. This is from Uganda. The issue of co-infections and comorbidities is going to have to be increasingly thought of. We have more and more people on treatment. You're well familiar with this, this list of these. It was interesting last year with the non-communicable disease ignition of HIV was really the first chronic disease treatment that's been embraced and implemented by the global health community. And as we move into other communicable and non-communicable diseases, we see a lot of similarity of issues and challenges. And I'm going through this list, but they should be familiar to all of you. Now, availability of drugs. I want to touch on 5 areas as how will we meet for the drugs and accessing the drugs. This is a map of countries that are currently purchasing Indian-produced generics. Most of the world depends on India. Now that could change depending on the implementation of the free trade agreement that was signed between the EU and India, but this is something that we have to watch. Managing intellectual property rights. How do we make sure that the implementation of IPR does not retard access to the drugs that are critically needed? How to deal with a whole range of issues, including research and development, which is becoming an increasing problem. Harmonizing and simplifying drug regulatory processes. These are very slow and continue to be slow, and they will retard the ability to provide the optimum regimens. There are now a number of harmonized regulation initiatives in place, one being the African Medicines Harmonization Project that was just launched in Arusha about 2 weeks ago. This will involve issues about guaranteed markets and a number of other issues. Local production. Now, this may not be the answer for every drug or for every country or for every region, but these are countries that are currently exploring local drug production for the long term. We recognize that India in the 70s was importing essentially all drugs. It took 30 years for India to develop the capacity to be the major producer of generic and some branded drugs. So we're talking about a long-term strategy here. What will it take? It will require volume, guaranteed markets, regional hubs, the ability of countries to work together, access to APIs, and all sorts of critical issues to make this work about taxation. Who gets the taxes from these companies? What are the labor laws? If you put in a manufacturing plant in Kenya, can Malawians work there? These aren't things that normally would come up at a TasP meeting, but we have to work through this if we are really talking seriously about implementing. Funding. This map should be familiar. The hard red countries are countries where more than 80% of the purchasing of ARVs come externally. We have huge dependency in sub-Saharan Africa. How are we going to deal with this? Clearly, there's a need for a shared responsibility and a global solidarity that will allow a proper balance between domestic purchasing and external donors. And it has to work hand in hand, or it will not occur. This is something that UNAIDS is currently working on closely with other partners, including PEPFAR, as far as there are countries in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly those that have greater than 5% economic growth, that should be playing a greater role in drug purchasing. And this is a cascade, a different type of cascade, that looks at if those countries that had greater than 5% increase their contribution, the Abuja commitment for 15%, and by disease burden, could generate close to another $5 billion US per year. And we're going to need this. There are all sorts of innovative country-level approaches to financing. Taxing alcohol and tobacco, which is generally not done in most countries in sub-Saharan Africa. AIDS levies, trust funds, the UNAIDS tax, airline tax being brought down to country level, and other innovative taxes like mobile phones, remittance flows. Finally, I want to end with the other third. How are we going to cover the phase of acute infection? And I use third with some true caveats as far as the level of transmission that occurs in individual epidemics from a person who's acutely infected that will probably not be captured by a treatment as prevention agenda. How will this be dealt with? And again, I think the point made that we have to continue with combination prevention. I want to end with a proverb. Michel Sidibe, my boss, is great at telling stories that he heard from his father and from his neighbors. He also has a lot of proverbs. And this one, I think, is particularly relevant for implementing a treatment as prevention agenda on a global basis. If you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that's what we're going to all have to do. Thanks.